We have taken up the study of the last 6 chapters of Sri Aurobindo's book, The Life Divine. These 6 chapters form a kind of a rapid summary of the overall content of the entire book. And from there, the practical implications and applications for the integral yoga, for the goal that the Life Divine sets before us. The framework of the book not only takes up all the difficult problems of human existence, of even the universe's existence, the nature of reality, and penetrating deep into all the possible perspectives, it shows you the deeper principles around which these different perspectives fall in place naturally as complementary aspects of a deeper truth. And as we go through the entire book, our mind is shown all the different visions in which the universe and reality can be known through, but brings us to the most essential experience that unites all these perspectives. The last 6 chapters then take the practical form of what it means for us in the integral yoga, the stages through which our life has to pass in order that this underlying reality can become more and more expressed in our life, that our human mental consciousness can grow into its highest possibility in a supramental consciousness and eventually even in a supramental life. So that's the broad thrust of these last 6 chapters. But for our purpose, we began with half of the previous chapter titled Rebirth and Other Worlds, which we completed last time, where Sri Aurobindo gives us the secret of a practical immortality by which we can develop our present consciousness and sufficiently integrate it with the divine principle within the psychic being, so that the overall imprint of this personality can carry over into the next life without needing to lose memory and restart all over again to recover, remember why we are here, and continue where we left off. This, we saw, is an essential requirement if we want to compress the whole evolution and take it all the way through to a practical spiritual transformation. The discussion we had last was about the survival of the physical body, because we saw how it is possible to take the subtle body, the mind and the vital, organize them sufficiently around the psychic being to carry them into the next. But the problem of the physical body is much more difficult, and he had placed there the condition in which even the physical body could be made to last. And for that, he had said, the physical being could only endure if by some means its physical causes of decay and disruption could be overcome. And at the same time, it could be made so plastic and progressive in its structure and its functioning that it would answer to each change demanded on it by the progress of the inner person, so that the body can keep pace with the soul in its continuing self-expression and in its growth into its spiritual possibilities. We had looked at what the content of the chapter was, the nuances and implications, but the final secret of how at all this can be done was left open. And we mentioned that the mother does speak of what the secret is in her conversations in 1970, recorded in the agenda. And I want to take that up now before we begin these last 6 chapters. And you will see how it neatly completes the discussion so far, as well as prepares us for the next step of the discussion. There are in fact 3 passages in the Mother's agenda where she makes reference to this difficulty of the physical body and its inability to continue and what is required for its transformation. One of them is in the agenda in 1960, where she reminds the Satprem, who is recording the agenda, that Sri Aurobindo spoke of 300 years as being necessary in order to make this completion of the physical transformation. Remember, here the discussion is about the physical body itself being divinized and transformed in a supramental consciousness. And so that process, Sri Aurobindo had told her 300 years. But in this discussion in 1962, where again the same question comes up, and again she mentions 300 years, the discussion goes a little deeper. In the first discussion of 1960, she says, whatever work is being done in her body to make the cells not only conscious, but even conscious of the divine and responsive to the divine, whatever work is done, she says, it will be wasted, it will be lost if the body has to be shed. Because after all, the material of the body will not be able to keep its memory of what it has developed. Once the body is shed, it becomes dust. The consciousness may retain, but the material will not retain. And that was the point she had made there. But in this discussion, Satprem points to the problem of transformation, and Mother gives a deeper insight here. She says, she is going through a series of experiences of the truth coming from above, and that, she says, it has an effect. All these things have an effect on the way the body functions, the workings of the organs, the brain, the nerves, and so on. And this will certainly take place long before there is any effect on the external form. Meaning in her body, the internal transformation on the working of the organs is going on. Its final external result may take long. And then she says, actually, when people speak of transformation, they are mainly thinking of a picturesque transformation, aren't they? A beautiful appearance, luminous, supple, plastic, changing at will. But they don't give much thought to this other thing, this rather unaesthetic transformation of the organs. And yet it's certainly what's going to happen first, long before the appearance is transformed. So you will recall in the last passage we had read, Sri Aurobindo speaks of the requirement, not only that the physical causes of decay and disruption should be overcome, but the body should become so plastic and progressive in its structure and its functioning. And here is what we are speaking of, the organs themselves in their functioning. And Satprem comments, Sri Aurobindo spoke of the working of the chakras replacing the organs. And Mother's reply, yes, 300 years, he said. Mother laughs. This was in relation to one of Sri Aurobindo's last writings, where he takes up this question of the physical transformation and develops also the intermediate step of the mind of light. But there, speaking of the physical transformation, Sri Aurobindo says increasingly as the body becomes more and more divinized, the divine power working behind and through matter will come forward and begin to take up the functioning of matter itself, and thereby replacing the physical process and its dependence on process by a direct action of energy of a higher consciousness. So for example, if we look at the heart has to pump blood. But what is it really doing? It is sucking some material from elsewhere in the body and then pushing it back to flow through the body. That's the larger, deeper function of the heart. But look a step deeper. What is this material that it's taking and pushing? The blood. Why is the blood necessary? It is carrying energy in the form of oxygen perhaps, and nutrition. The heart takes the old blood with less nutrition, less oxygen and energy, pushes it harder through the lungs, where they will draw more material, more energy, oxygen, and also at other stages draw nourishment from the digestive processes, and then pushes them back to other organs all over the body. Abstract this one more step. What's really happening? A forced circulation of energy and a nutrition is being made to take place. Something is required which continues circulation of energy, nutrition, by which all other organs act and survive. Abstract this one level further. Forget heart, forget blood. Look only at the energy that is being pumped and the substance of nutrition which becomes substance of the new cells that is being pushed. And now what you have as a picture is a center functioning to radiate energy and radiate material which will form the body. And at the same time, perhaps as a secondary function, withdrawing wasted material, but that may or may not last. If the center pushing is strong enough, the material which is wasted can be disposed of by other means. Now, if you look at the lungs, similarly, look at their deeper functioning. They are drawing air from outside, oxygen or other materials, and then taking them through a filtration to infuse into the body process. The filtration is to remove everything else which is unnecessary and protect what is already infused so that it does not break out. And the action of drawing in to infuse and then pushing out the stale air so that it may replace another with another burst of energy. If you abstract it through many levels, what are the lungs doing? They are the part of our consciousness which relates to the universal energy, connecting it to the individual energy, drawing in, and then infusing into the body. The heart taking up some of this and pushing it into the body. Now, if you abstract in this way the working of all the organs, you will find they can be replaced by a direct working of energy. The lungs, for example, can be replaced by a direct relationship of this part of the body with the universal life force in a manner that it can draw it within and concretize it, materialize it sufficiently to support the body's energy requirement. The heart would also not have to do a double pumping, as the lungs also don't have to take in to throw out. They may be able to take in, and the throwing out process might take place by the lower organs as they are already doing it. So in this way, step by step, abstracting all the operations of the organs, we can see how not only an energy working directly in matter could replace them, but interestingly, each of these organs is located at a center of energy of the chakras, where already such an operation is taking place. The heart chakra naturally opens out in resonance to the universal energy and the universal life force. It is not only that which takes in, but also gives out. The lower chakras similarly have functions which match the level at which the organs exist around them. So Sri Aurobindo, in a very suggestive passage, indicates that in the supramentally transformed body, this direct working of energies will gradually replace the physical dependence on process and material. Such a body, therefore, will be able to literally will itself to draw more energy, will itself to exercise a greater extent of nourishment that it infuses into the body, and so on, and shape itself from inside out, sustain itself from inside out by conscious and even a superconscious process of a spiritual energy. And this is what Satprem is pointing to from that text, where he says, Sri Aurobindo spoke of the working of the chakras replacing the organs. And Mother, yes, 300 years, he said. And she laughs. Then after a silence, she says, with a bit of reflection, it's easy to understand. If it were a question of stopping something and starting something else, it might be done rather rapidly. You'll stop this body, transfer your consciousness into another body. You can discard the existing structure, move into a new structure of working. Done. Easy to do. But instead she says, but to keep a body alive, to keep it functioning, and at the same time have enough of a new functioning so that it stays alive. And then a transformation. That makes a very difficult combination to realize. I'm fully aware of it, fully aware of the immense amount of time that's needed for this to be done without catastrophe. The practical analogy we can take, let's say you're driving a car which is based on the old steam engine, and you have to put fire, pour water, it creates steam which goes and pushes pistons, which turns the wheels and so on. And as you're driving the car, it's functioning fully. You want to now replace all the working of the car by a diesel engine and a diesel working. You can see the difficulty if you had to do it without stopping the car. If you stop it, put it to sleep, take out the engine, replace another, replace all the parts, you have a new car. But if you're running the car and you start to make small changes, it's much more difficult. Take it a step further, make it an electric car now. And none of the pistons, none of the engines are any more relevant. Even the central motor is no more relevant because the motors go straight into the wheels. You have a much more radical change. How can you make a transition like that without stopping the activity which is ongoing? If this heart is to be replaced by that working of the power, and in a smooth transition without stopping the process of life, well, it's going to be much more complicated and much more gradual, therefore. And then she says, above all, of course, when we come to the heart, to replace the heart with the center of power, a formidable dynamic power, Mother laughs. At what precise moment are you going to eliminate the circulation and throw in the force? At some point, you will have to have some kind of transition. It's difficult. No, I don't have much to say. Nothing of what I have just been telling you is publishable, Mother says. It can go in the agenda, but it can't be published. And so we skip this portion and go now to that great revelation that she makes in 1970. There she's speaking of her experience in seeing the body of one of the sadhikas living in the ashram and the psychic being. And she says, it was yesterday or the day before, R was here just in front of me kneeling, and I saw her psychic being towering above by this much, gesture of about 8 inches taller. It's the first time. Her physical being was short and the psychic being was tall, like this. And it was a sexless being, neither man nor woman. So I said to myself, it may be always that way, I don't know, but at that time I noticed it very clearly. I said to myself, but the psychic being is the one that will materialize and become the supramental being. I saw it. It was like that. There were distinctive features but not very pronounced, and it was clearly a being that was neither male nor female, that had features of both combined, and it was taller than her. It exceeded her on every side by about this much, gesture extending beyond the physical being by about 8 inches. She was here and it was like this. This color was that if it became very material, would be Auroville's color, orange. It was softer, as if behind a veil. It was absolutely precise, but it was this color. And there was hair, but it was something else. Now she's describing the form of the psychic being, and she says, its color was, if it became very material, then it would be orange. And now what does that mean? In fact, in the experience we find, as we shift out from the physical world, from the physical substance into the subtle world, the range of colors is much larger. The dynamic range of the colors, the brightness, and the luminescence are much larger. And so when you look at something in the subtle world and then you try to translate it into the physical world, you find there is no equivalent color. And if you go still deeper into the psychic domain, at that point, there is no sense of rigidity of form. And so the sense of color also is of pure soul experience. How do you translate that into physical terms? And so this is what she is describing. If somehow that became dense like matter, then this is the color that you would experience. It was softer, as if behind a veil. And then she says, another time maybe I'll see better. But I found it very interesting because that being seemed to tell me, you're wondering what the supramental being will be? Here it is. Here it is. This is it. And it was there. It was her psychic being. Then one understands. One understands the psychic being will materialize and it gives a continuity to evolution. And she explains, this creation gives you a clear impression that nothing is arbitrary, that there is a sort of divine logic behind which isn't like our human logic, but highly superior to our logic, but it exists. And that logic was fully satisfied when I saw that. She mentions another experience of somebody, she saw the supramental light, and so I skipped that. And she discusses her own body at a certain stage in her sadhana for humanity. Her mind and vital were as if set aside, and only the body was left as the full focus for her transformation. And she says, the body and the psychic being were left. So then I understood why the mind and vital were sent away from this body and the psychic being was left. Naturally, it was the psychic being that covered all movements earlier, so it was nothing new. But there were no more difficulties. All the complications coming from the vital and the mind, which had their imprints, their tendencies, it was all gone. So I understood, that's it. It's this psychic being that is to become the supramental being. I had never bothered to know what it looked like, but when I saw that, I understood. And I see it, I still see it. I have kept the memory. Its hair almost looked red. Strangely, it wasn't like red hair, but it looked like it. And its expression, such a fine expression, gently ironical, so extraordinary. Oh, extraordinary, extraordinary. You understand, my eyes were open. It was an almost material vision. Then one understands, all at once, all questions vanished. It became very clear, very simple. And the psychic is precisely what lives on. So if it materialized, it means doing away with death. But doing away, what's done away with, is only what's not according to the truth. That's what goes away. All that's incapable of being transformed in the image of the psychic, of being part of the psychic. That's really interesting. And so it ends there. This last part is very interesting when she speaks of doing away with death. What is it that is shed? Both in death and in any evolution, in any growth or change. Only what is not according to the truth, that's what goes away. All that is incapable of being transformed in the image of the psychic, of being part of the psychic. Now think about this, because it's something so profound. In your mind, whatever in your mind's working, thinking, habits, ideas, is not according to the deeper truth of the soul, of the divine presence, of your inmost being that is really the one journeying. Whatever is not aligned to that, what happens to it? Eventually, it goes out of sync and eventually becomes so irrelevant it just falls away. That process of going out of sync, becoming irrelevant and falling away is what we call decay. What is alive, what is fresh, that which is directly living expression of what is true. And then after a while, the thing doesn't remain alive and fresh because it's moved out of sync with what is true, because the truth has moved forward, the universe has moved forward, God has moved forward. So Sri Aurobindo has this phrase, God shall grow up while the wise men talk and sleep. Meaning the whole journey of the evolution moving forward is really the divine revealing, unfolding, unveiling itself. And anything which is in sync is now fresh and living. As it moves out of sync, we find it becoming stale, losing force, until it does not have the support of the truth anymore, it just breaks down. So in your mind, the parts of you which are rigid, unable to keep pace, well, they start breaking down. In your vital emotions, energies, similarly, and the same in your body. Except that the mind is more plastic. Energies are more plastic. And so, when you find something is old and it's become stale, you're able to shape your mind, replacing the old with the new. And every now and then you realize, oh, the way I was thinking, it does not fit anymore the need of my present, and there is a sudden change that takes place. But we can't do that with the body. The resistance of the body, its rigidity in form is so much greater that somehow we are unable to force the body to shape itself. In fact, the first experience of aging is you realize that you want to do what you were always doing, and suddenly your body is being dragged. It's lagging. It's somehow not in sync, unable to keep up. What is this? You feel the gap, and the gap grows more and more, and suddenly you find, oh, why is my body like this? I don't feel it in myself. That gap grows until the body eventually becomes a shell, unable to keep up. And you say, well, not interesting. You choose to drop it. To take on a fresh body now, which is supple enough that now it can express what you are, what you need. So what's falling away always is this which cannot keep up with the truth. Now look at this in a larger perspective of your life. Your relationships, your friendships, your environment, everything is undergoing some kind of change. We used to be friends since childhood. We have met every year on a particular day, let's say, to celebrate something. You have a habit going on. You've dragged it long enough. Suddenly you realize, what's the point of this? It doesn't satisfy me anymore. Why do we need to meet? And one day an occasion happens, you can't meet for a reason. You tell your friend, well, sorry this time, and then you never repeat. I remember it took a certain form in my life where I used to take pains to greet certain friends every year. And after a while it became a habit, and then I was traveling for a while and I forgot. Or maybe it didn't matter. And those contacts just faded away. And I realized it changed nothing. In fact, if I had continued to force it, I would have created an artificial relationship which had no more relevance. But if you think about all the relationships of your life and all the activities of your life which you so cherish, things tend to decline when they lose the vividness of the truth. And when they become more superficial and simply a convention, simply a habit, and then they fall away, to be replaced by now something which is more fresh, more true, more living and real. And when you think of it like this, death is even the physical death, is only an aid to this renewal. And that's why it's as if, in the traditions, it is said that death is your gateway to immortality. It is what helps you then to remain truly living, immortal in consciousness. But still, we're looking at the body's limitations, and here she gives the key. The part in you that is ever fresh, ever young, always true, is the psychic being. And when that comes forward and takes charge, and when that shapes your thoughts and emotions, and even your physical body, then to the extent that its influence is there, it is always fresh and young and true. But so far we saw the psychic only as an influence in the mind and in the emotions and perhaps even on the body, but as an influence. But if the psychic consciousness becomes more and more densified, not just as an influence, but as an active substance infusing into the body, When its substantiality becomes so concrete that it begins now even to become the physical body, at that point you will have the physical transformation, the supramental body, which will be what the physical result will be of the divinization. And here mothers had this insight. And the psychic is precisely what lives on. So, if it is materialized, it means doing away with death. And you notice in all of our earlier discussion, in our study of the life divine, where Sri Aurobindo described how the mental personality and even the vital personality could be carried into the next life, it was really formation of the individuality, integration with the inner, eventually all the way to the psychic, and being plastic in expression for the needs of the evolving spirit and psychic being. And it's obvious, the one thing which is able to do that is the psychic consciousness. So what we have here is an extraordinary insight. The psychic being which has been secretly leading evolution, inhabiting this triple body, now comes forward more and more, not only as an influence, but becoming densified as the substance of all these bodies. And it becomes now the very substance of divinity as the supramental body. This insight will now link to the next chapter which we are beginning, where Sri Aurobindo, in the very first paragraph, describes the nature of this struggle of spiritual evolution taking place in matter which is resistant. The chapter is titled Man and the Evolution. The first paragraph will describe this, and keep in mind, at the back of the mind, the idea that it is the psychic being that will materialize eventually to become this transformed body. And you will see the insight we gain as we read this paragraph. Subsequently, for the rest of the paragraph, Sri Aurobindo will then describe what are the core principles and processes of this evolution in humanity. And these should be retained into the whole yoga and the process of yoga and at the eventual transformation of the human being into divine being and divine life. So he is going now to most essential principles. The chapter, as every chapter of the Life Divine, begins with quotations from the various Upanishads or the Vedas. In these quotations, Sri Aurobindo shows you how the seed ideas which he will be discussing in this chapter were already perceived in these traditions. And so, in a sense, he links the ancient knowledge of the Veda and the early Upanishads to what he is bringing forward today in a more mental formation suitable for the modern mind of humanity. Whereas earlier forms of expression of the same truths were more intuitive and suitable for the age then. He has 5 quotations. The first from Shvetashvatara Upanishad. The one Godhead secret in all beings, all pervading, the inner self of all, presiding over all actions, witness, conscious knower and absolute. The one in control over the many who are passive to nature, fashions one seed in many ways. So you get the gist of this idea. One consciousness in all these forms, always inhabiting all the forms. The forms themselves are being fashioned by nature. Nature drives your body evolution. It's running everything. You don't do anything with your body. It makes you hungry, it digests, it heals. Nature, after all. You are just somewhere, this awareness inside, looking out. But the one who controls you and all the many, you who are passive to nature, that one fashions one seed in many ways. That is, there is one seed behind all humanity. One seed behind each animal species, let's say. And yet each form of the species is different. The real idea is what Sri Aurobindo will refer to as a seed principle around which or from which all the variations emerge of forms. So this is the first quotation. The second also from Shvetashvatara Upanishad. The Godhead moves in this field, the whole universe, the cosmic field, modifying each web of things separately in many ways. One, he presides over all wombs and natures, himself the womb of all. He is that which brings to ripeness the nature of the being, and he gives to all who have to be matured the result of development, and appoints all qualities to their workings. So again, a complex sentence, but in essence, the idea that there is one consciousness, and although everything is interconnected in the world, this is the web of things, each thing in the web is as if separately modified. He presides all the wombs, that is, the whole movement of birth, of new forms emerging from old. Not only the physical womb, let's say, in an animal or a human, which gives birth to a new body, but equally in stone, the womb in which new elements are created. In the sun, the womb in which new elements are produced to be thrown out to become the planets. In anything, in the tree, the womb from which the flower emerges, always there is this creative focus concentrating to give birth to something different and new. Everywhere there is this creative focus, and he presides over all the wombs, himself the womb of all. The whole universe bursts out of his concentration and creative expression. He is that which brings to ripeness the nature of the being. Within each thing there is the essential being. Within the flower is the essence of the flower. He makes the flower come to ripeness, to reveal fully. And whatever has matured, he gives to them the result of their development. So in this vision, we see the one presiding over not only all the forms and their creations, but also their fulfillment. But who is that one? Where is that one? In all beings. He moves in this field, not only presiding over from above, but in all things. The third quotation from Katha Upanishad. He fashions one form of things in many ways. Similar idea, different text. Next from the Rig Veda. Who has perceived this occult truth, that the child gives being to the mothers by the workings of his nature? An offspring from the lap of many waters? He comes forth from them a seer, possessed of his whole law of nature. Manifested, he grows in the lap of their crookedness and becomes high, beautiful, and glorious. This is the offspring of the lap of many waters. The waters here are the different levels of consciousness, domains of consciousness, and from all of these is formed something. And the seer, possessed of his whole law of nature, this is the consciousness of Agni, who sees, carries within him the knowledge by which he will fulfill himself. So it's the vision from within the seed that knows what it must become, draws material from all these different grades of consciousness, and forms himself to fulfill. Literally, the sense of the soul entering into this world, taking material from the mind, from the life, from matter, and forming around itself to fulfill itself in these different densities of substance. And finally, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. From the non-being to true being, from the darkness to the light, from death to immortality. So, and the implication is, what is this being doing? When it took up form, it was in substance which was unconscious, even inconscient, empty, blank slate. And into that, it put itself and formed out of it, made beings, many beings, growing eventually to true being. Where there was darkness, increasingly it brings awareness of consciousness, growth of light, until it reveals the true light of the origin. And where everything was lost in death, in complete empty space, it has not only created form, but the struggle in the form, which is repeatedly dying, eventually it awakens to a consciousness which is immortal and even seizes on form to be able to express its immortality. Now, all these, you will see, have within the common thread of the struggle of evolution of the divine himself inside the evolutionary process, driving from within, but at the same time supporting from above, presiding over the whole process and ensuring that things are led to their fulfillment. And even though there is a common template to the evolution, everything is different and unique. So this is you will see here the key common ideas across all these quotations. And this is what you will see through the rest of the chapter, now fully elaborated. He begins thus: a spiritual evolution, an evolution of consciousness in matter, in a constant developing self-formation, till the form can reveal the indwelling spirit, is then the keynote, the central significant motive of the terrestrial existence. This significance is concealed at the outset by the involution of the spirit, the divine reality, in a dense material inconscience. So at first you have this concealment, but what's really coming out is the spiritual evolution. Consciousness evolving in matter in a constant developing self-formation, meaning at each step the consciousness is saying, how do I want to express myself? How do I want to fully draw out what I am capable of, what I am already in consciousness? Now you notice in a very simple way, a child looking at the world, what does he do? He's trying to understand. Once he begins to understand, he tries to seize upon what's happening, catch, change, move, modify. To do what? Assert himself. Assert what? Something he feels he is able to do to become or to influence in his environment. This is the impulse at the heart of the whole spiritual evolution. Constant developing self-formation. You're changing all the time. But the change is not merely going round and round. It's developing to something new. And what is it that is developing? What you are already somehow within as a seed. This is the keynote. It is a point on which the music keeps returning. So for a while it's as if the music wanders to some other aspect. Oh, I want to learn something new. But then it comes back to affirming and asserting your own growth. Having learned this new thing now, I can more effectively express myself or become more mature and so on. So it's the keynote, the thing around which everything else, all the music forms. The central significant motive of the terrestrial existence. Now you can exist on many levels. You can exist in the vital world, mental world, live in the spiritual worlds. You can live in the higher mental worlds like the Gandharvas, beings of music and art, poetry. And these are wonderful, beautiful worlds. But there, whatever you experience, whatever you grow in, is within the type of that life. So the musical being is busy exploring greater wonders and variations of its music. The power being is busy exploring the greater forms and expressions of its powers. The thinking, rational mind is busy exploring its rational possibilities and thinking new ideas and greater ideas. But it's stuck in that. The physical domain, material world, terrestrial existence, is the one place where you can experience all of these, and all of these superimposed and interdependent on each other. And this is the beauty of it. So the central significant motive of terrestrial existence, if you want to take birth in matter in a body and not live only in those worlds, then here is this point, the motive, the most important thing is constant evolution of consciousness in matter by self-formation that's developing. And all of these layer by layer open out of matter, and you have the experience of evolution. You do not have experience of evolution on those worlds in this sense. Yes, you grow, you create new things, but within your type. Here you grow and create new things, break beyond your type to make for new types of experience, all of which become now facets of your growing personality. So yes, I am a musician now, tomorrow I am a thinker, day after I am a warrior, and they are all facets of my consciousness unfolding. This kind of evolution is possible because there was at first this very hard, numbing, dulling, compressing influence that shut all possibilities down into inconscience. So that's why he says, this significance is concealed at the outset by the involution of the spirit, the divine reality, in a dense material inconscience. All those levels of consciousness which exist with their own worlds, as if compress and plunge into matter and lose themselves into this darkness, and they are concealed now. So first you see only this inconscience, but now because these things are concealed, they start nudging, pushing. But because all of those are concealed, they can all emerge and grow. And in the physical life, in a material body, you can experience all the levels of consciousness simultaneously expressed. So, but the significance, the central motive of evolution, of spiritual evolution, is hidden because of the dulling, dense material inconscience. But with the involution, it is hidden. The divine reality is hidden. Spirit is hidden. And this is going to be extremely important. A veil of inconscience, a veil of insensibility of matter hides the universal conscious force which works within it, so that the energy, which is the first form the force of creation assumes in the physical universe, appears to be itself inconscient and yet does the work of a vast occult intelligence. And so now he's going to describe all the steps of evolution. In the very first step, what has happened is this veil, this screen of matter which hides everything, prevents you from seeing that it is actually the conscious force, capital C and F, that is the Chit of the Satchidananda, the Chit Shakti of the Satchidananda, which is actually hidden, works within it, within matter. So I take an object, here's a stone. I don't see consciousness. I don't see force. I don't even see energy. All I see is rigid matter. I can whack it, it doesn't break, it resists. Oh, it's just stone. It's not alive, it's not conscious. But if you were able to see through this screen, this veil of matter, what do you see? The first thing you discover is there is an energy inside it. And then that's what science tells you. Here's a lump of uranium. If I gather enough uranium into my hands, then eventually it starts becoming warm. If I gather still more, it becomes so warm that it heats up, and before I know it, there's a flash and an explosion and energy is released. Where did it come from? It was already hidden inside the uranium, and uranium is unstable. So the instability aggrandized when I brought too much of it together. But if I take a piece of iron or that stone, the same energy is in it also. And in that flash of the nuclear explosion, barely a few atoms became pure energy. The bulk of it was just thrown out in the impact of the explosion. Just a few atoms releasing so much energy. What you see in matter is energy which forms matter. So he says, in the evolution, the first form the force of creation assumes in the physical universe is energy, capital E. And so science has come to this discovery. It says, yes, all matter is energy, but something strange. This energy appears to be itself inconscient and yet does the works of a vast occult intelligence. If you notice how the energy is working, it is so intelligent that you can actually watch its intelligent working and declare that working as law of the energy. So the laws of physics, what are they really? They are just descriptions of what we see that energy doing. When we say, for example, in an atom, there can only be so many electrons in the first orbit. In the second orbit, there can only be so many electrons. Why? And no physicist has really answered that question. All they have done is they have observed this model, created equations to describe the model, and they say, this is the law. If an extra electron pops in, then one has to pop out. Why? Well, that's how it is. But the reality is, it is energy working with an intelligence that ensures this rhythm, this pattern, and everywhere equally. Not only that, the energy works in such a way that when the atoms come together, they bind themselves in beautiful geometric forms. Perfect triangles, squares, octagons, and so on. And the geometric forms are so perfect, you can capture them with perfect equations. Simple formulas which capture a whole complexity of relationships. And so again, your mind says, this is a law. Imposed by whom? It's supposed to be inconscient energy, supposed to be chaotic, random movements of energy, and somehow they have this perfect symmetric structure. So much so that not just in atoms, if you take a grain of salt and put it in a supersaturated salt solution, we do this experiment as children. After a while it grows and becomes a salt crystal, a big, nice, neat cube. And different kinds of materials have different kinds of shapes. Some of them so extraordinary in their crystalline structure, perfect parallel surfaces on two sides of the crystal. How do you explain that? It's as if on this side, when the molecules fell into place randomly by chance, they knew the place of the molecules on the other side. They knew the place of the molecules around them to become perfectly smooth crystals. You've all seen these crystals in rock. There's a projection like a stump, 5-sided and the neat point, but each of the sides is flat, plane. And just to prove to you that there is no compulsion to be perfectly flat, there are also odd breaks in the pattern. But to prove to you that it's not random, you also have perfectly smooth, flat surfaces. Amazingly beautiful. And so perfect geometrically that you can capture them in simple formulas. So there is an obvious kind of intelligence without which you cannot explain this working. When you actually go into quantum physics, they will tell you weird things like when a particle moves, it as if senses the field before it, as if smelling, there are 2 slits or 1 slit, and its behavior changes according to the environment around. What does that mean? It means within the particle is a knowledge of its environment, and the power or its energy modifies itself according to that knowledge. How far is the environment of its influence of sniffing? Theoretically, in quantum physics, all the way into the whole universe. Except you cannot make calculations with infinity, so you make a practical cut and only look at a limited area of your experiment. But in principle, an electron is pulsating as a wave. It has a frequency, it has a amplitude, so pulsating as a wave. This electron is rippling energy or waves of energy which go all the way to the end of the universe and as if reflect back to reform the pulsation of the electron. This is the physics. This is the equation of physics. And the only way you can describe the inertia of the electron, the resistance to movement, is by considering the full influence extending into the whole universe and the influence of the whole universe upon this electron. Amazing. What it means is at every point of the energy's movement, there is an intelligence which embraces the whole universe and perfectly synchronizes this energy flow to pulse in harmony with the whole universe. And at each point so. Each random particle that seems to appear and disappear in a moment is held in this perfect embrace of a complete intelligence, capital I. and build now in this way all the levels of matter, all the elements, all the molecules, all the different chemical and then amino acids, and then the cells and the organs and the bodies. Your body right now and its inertia, its movement, formed of that complex energy flow, is held together by the constant alignment with the entire universe, by an intelligence which sustains not only the body, but the whole universe and everything in its details perfectly. The workings of this intelligence, as we glimpse, we describe them as laws of physics or principles of chemistry or biology or life or whatever else. So he says, the veil of insensibility of matter hides the universal conscious force which works within it. And that's why you don't see that behind that energy is conscious, intelligent force. So that the energy, which is the first form the force of creation assumes in the physical universe, appears to be itself inconscient and yet does the works of a vast occult intelligence. The intelligence is hidden. We do not see what could do it, and yet it's there. And all this is the working of the consciousness force creating things in the physical universe. And the first thing it creates is the appearance of pure energy. And that's why you will see, when you see things in relation to each other across great distances of scale in the universe, all you describe is force. This particle attracts or repels that particle. All is force. But the tension of that force attracting or repelling is the quantum of energy which makes for the density of the particle. So the first physicality of the working of this intelligent force and consciousness is energy. The obscure, mysterious creatrix ends indeed by delivering the secret consciousness out of its thick and tenebrous prison. So this creative intelligence, although hidden, eventually delivers consciousness out of its prison. We are the example of that. We have become conscious, although made of matter, which is supposed to be inconscient. We can dwell on each of these words. Mysterious creatrix. She has a mystery. What does it mean to be mysterious? What is the nature of mystery? And the true sense of mystery is that something does not fit, something is hidden from you, and you dig to find the source, the cause. If it's a puzzle, you dig once and you find its solution. But if it's a mystery, you dig once and you discover a deeper cause, and observing that cause, you find something does not fit, something is missing. And now you need to dig another level to explain this. And you find the solution, but that solution itself hides something more. And you have to keep digging. And the deeper you go in digging, the more you find, oh, there's also this, and then there is this, and there is this. The nature of mystery, if you see in modern physics, is they said, all right, all this is made of molecules. All molecules are made of elements, and there are only so many 100 plus elements. And all elements are made only of three things: protons, electrons, neutrons. Now, if we go one more step, we should have found a single particle that made all protons, electrons, neutrons. But the moment they dig deeper, suddenly you find a zoo of 300 particles. You dig deeper and you find even more complexities of unstable energies. The deeper you go, the more it becomes a mystery. That's the character of this mysterious creatrix. And obscure, because with all this mystery, she makes it very difficult for you even to glimpse how much struggle even to discover the electron or the proton. And out of this thick, dark prison, the consciousness has still been delivered. It has come into its own through the evolution. This thick and tenebrous prison is a description of the character of the inconscience. When you enter into it in consciousness, it is not only so thick, it is sticky. You enter in and it sticks to you, and then it binds you like tar. You get stuck in it, you're unable to move, and the deeper you go, the darker it becomes, until even if you take your awareness in, your awareness becomes extinguished and you can be lost. You will find the description of Ashwapati entering inconscience and going deep to find the secret of inconscience, an experience that Sri Aurobindo has personally gone through, which he documents in that passage in Savitri. And he says there comes a point where even your little consciousness, the thread that you hold, is about to be extinguished. And at that point, the only thing remaining is the inner light and the remembrance of the name, and he takes it through into the domain of form until he finds the secret of the inconscience. And that secret is that same divine up there revealed is here sleeping within. So we don't go into that. But this conscious force, this occult intelligence, but she delivers it slowly, little by little. The consciousness which was secret has been delivered because we have become conscious, it's come out. But how did it come out? She delivers it slowly, little by little, in minute, infinitesimal drops, in thin jets, in small, vibrant concretions of energy and substance, of life, of mind, as if that were all she could get out through the crass obstacle, the dull, reluctant medium of an inconscient stuff of existence. Now, this whole description is something so extraordinary. If you looked at it from a physicist's viewpoint, or a chemist's viewpoint, or even a biologist's viewpoint, you'll find he's actually describing the processes taking place in the way they form. But first, what is it doing? How does it release this consciousness? From what? The dull, reluctant medium of an inconscient stuff of existence. The base material from which we are formed in body, and even our thinking mind has emerged, is this dull, reluctant. It does not want to do. You force it, and okay, it yields for a while, but afterwards it says enough, and it pulls you back. You get tired. You have to give up. And then again. So, dull, reluctant medium is this substance, the stuff of your existence. And into that, what does it do? Slowly, little by little, okay, we've seen a few billion years, but the form is in minute, infinitesimal drops, first form. Second form, in thin jets. Third form, in small, vibrant concretions of energy and substance, of life and mind. So you will see how the first emergence out of matter, which creates life, takes on these three steps. The first emergence of mind in life also takes on these three steps. So he's captured essential processes of consciousness emerging out of matter. So first is minute infinitesimal drops. A drop is rounded. So small, infinitesimal, mean you can barely measure it, and these are what we will call subatomic particles, where you have the sense of an entity, a center, but you cannot really measure, you cannot really capture, you cannot really say there is something it is made of. So I discussed an electron as a pulsating wave of energy, but in your textbooks they will draw it like a ball, like a sphere. And if you ask yourself the question, if it's made like a ball, what is inside it? What is the ball made of? What holds its skin together? And you'll have a very big problem. The physicist will run away. Because that question opens a whole can of worms. If the electron is entirely negative as electric field, it's a negative field which, let's say, we describe as a sphere, round. So the entire surface is equally negative surface, right? And negative repels negative. So this side of the electron should repel that side of the electron. And the entire electron should burst apart instantly if it's purely one negative field. What holds it together? So the only way out of it is to describe the electron as an infinitesimal point. So there's nothing inside it. But when it is infinitesimal point, does it really exist? Is it just a point field, a mathematical idea? Well, in fact, when you try to measure it, you find you bump into it somehow at a particular distance. So you actually measure diameter of electron. It's not an infinitesimal point, and this is the problem of physics. You get into this space and the books don't even want to touch it. The scientists will say that's not our problem. Let's work on what we do with this knowledge. You cannot describe the reality of this ultimate or any particle in fact. They all have a size, but they all should fly apart instantly if they have a size. If they're infinitesimal, then they're practically non-existent. So he is describing this first, minute, infinitesimal, and yet it's a drop. It has a rounded sense of existence, consciousness emerging, coming into its own as a particle, a bundle of energy. But it's infinitesimal, and that's how all our calculations are done in physics. Although you say electron has a diameter, we imagine it's a single point without diameter. And yet in its expression, it seems to have a size, and so on. So the first minute infinitesimal drop of energy is what makes for matter. Out of that comes life. Again, in life, the same pattern appears. First, it's like a drop. What's the first form of life? The single cell. No, even before the cell, there is a form of life, which is so much on the border of life that we don't even know it's life. And we call it a prion, is one of the terms used, or in more common form today, we would refer to it as a virus. A virus, there are many kinds of virus, very small viruses and then complex viruses. The small viruses particularly have this strange character that they are both living and dead at the same time, and they are practically immortal. You can take some of these viruses out of their comfort zone, take them away from water, air, put them into empty vacuum or space, raise the temperature, lower the temperature. What happens is the moment you take it out of environment of water and humidity, the virus collapses to become crystalline. It's actually a crystal of molecules, no living characteristics. You bring it back into moisture and a certain air pressure and temperature, and the crystal now unfolds and it behaves like a living being, living cell. It does not have within itself the means to replicate itself. It must latch on into some other host, infuse itself into it, and use the machinery of the host to create copies of itself. So is it living? Is it dead? We don't know. And so there are viruses, even certain kinds of bacteria, which survive in empty space. Extreme cold, extremely dry, under heavy radiation, they travel between planets. They drift into Earth's atmosphere. And if they get a chance, then they begin to act, they become active. Very interestingly now, they call these, the term used is, the word zoo comes, exo meaning from outside, and the zoo, exozoology or something like that, of the life forms which are outside the planet, but it's again gets into a very strange realm. We find as we go into the higher atmosphere all kinds of strange bacteria which don't exist here, and obviously they're coming from outside. They're traveling between empty space and planets as this crystalline structure. Now if you caught that bacteria in some piece of rock, you would say, there's nothing living here, it's just crystalline. It activates and it becomes living. But still a bundle. It's a drop. Infinitesimal as far as life form is concerned. Okay, it does not have in its own the capacity to replicate, multiply. The same thing happens with mind. The first appearance of mind is like this tiny drop that pops up inside the cell, where the cell has a kind of an intelligence which is able to function and enter in relation to other things. If you observe a bacterium, a single cell, you find it puts out a long link of material. I think it's called a macrophage. It extends itself until it touches another bacterium. And in this link, it exchanges genetic material, food, we may say, information, we may say. And in this link, it exchanges electricity. So a complex link of bacteria sitting at the base of what we may call slime. You see, when a pipe has not been cleaned, it's this greenish, sticky layer. It's just bacteria tied together in these fine connections. There's electricity exchanged between them. Information, like a computer, exchanging knowledge and exchanging material between them. Some strange kind of life structure is formed of sharing, communication. But it involves an intelligence, because what you notice under the electron microscope, when a bacterium starts putting out this phage, it is already heading towards another bacterium. It knows it is there. It knows how to engage with it and connect with it and share information. The character of mind or some kind of a knowledge or conscious expression is popping up in that little drop. I've mentioned before the experiment which demonstrates intelligence inside the single cell of a bacterium. And the experiment was done in 1992, I believe. That's when I had seen it in some news reports. That they took a petri dish with a bacteria culture, introduced a poison which destroys the bacteria, kills it. And out of the millions of bacteria killed, a few dozen survived. And then grew, and they were immune to the poison. Except that you notice, a dozen that survived had all been genetically mutated now to become immune to this poison. Now, if genetic mutation is by chance, then one which had by chance a mutation should have survived and grown, but you had many dozens of them which had mutated all in the same way, sometimes with some variations even. What does that mean? It means within the bacterium there is an ability to recognize the threat and internally mutate sufficiently to become immune to that threat. And each one was trying to do. Those who could do it survived, those who couldn't died. And so the conclusion of the experiment was this, that there is a kind of an innate intelligence which knows how to mutate itself in response to environment. And what is the form of that intelligence or consciousness? Minute, infinitesimal drops. And then out of that, the next step is thin jets. It pushes out like a jet stream. And you will see this, one of the most common forms of emergence out of any compaction. On the earth, you will see jets of steam rushing out of a crack in the soil, or jets of water emerging, being thrown out. If you go to Jupiter and observe some of its moons, there are certain moons where there are jets of water which are thrown out from fine cracks in the ice. They are thrown out with such force that they go out all the way into space. Imagine a jet of water projected with that intensity. It's one of the forms in which the life energy organizes itself. The first form was this drop, but the second form is pushing out to exercise, extend itself. I spoke of the macrophages extending from the bacterium, the lines. They are jets of energy reaching out. The same thing in an organized form in the human being is taking the form of your arms and legs. When the form was coming into its own, the effort to extend its energy as a jet becomes this projection. The projection becoming organized and having finer jets become the arm and the fingers or the legs. So the second movement of life development and even of mind is this push, catching a weak point through which it can escape. Now it develops as far as it can, pushing it. So even in our intelligence, you will see when a child is learning, a faculty appearing, hey, this is so interesting, and he keeps on going through it until he exhausts that capacity. And then the urge stops. And then it finds another activity, another faculty, hey, this is interesting, and another jet. And many jets bursting out, eventually consolidating, integrating what they have developed, become now the new organized expanse of life or mind or consciousness. So the second form of energy is thin jets. And then when these thin jets connect and link with each other, they form small, vibrant concretions of energy and substance. So going back to the bacteria, putting out these links, sharing, exchanging electricity, nutrition, and even genetic material, you have created small, vibrant, there's constant exchange and activity. Concretion, they become materialized and organized in some way, energy and substance. Electricity exchanged as energy, or even nutrition, and the substance, including genetic material, exchanged. That is at the level of bacteria, the same thing at every level of organization of life. Even at the level of human beings. What are we as we emerge at birth? Well, a little bundle of joy, you will say. And then out of that little bundle come out extensions of consciousness, interests, influence. The first 2 points of interest or extensions of a little newborn baby is father, mother. These are the 2 points where it bonds energetically and it links into the world, and bit by bit it builds this until it has formed around itself small, vibrant concretion of social relations and organization. The whole family is doting around this little baby and trying to take care of it. It has created around it this. And then that grows, becomes more complex. But the same thing happens in the mind's working. In our mind, we put out a few impulses of awareness, skills, capacities, and then integrate them to create this vibrant ecosystem. And the same at the level of life. So what he has described in this are essential processes by which the consciousness pushes its way out of inconscience and organizes itself. So I'll reread the sentence. The obscure, mysterious creatrix ends up indeed by delivering the secret consciousness out of its thick and tenebrous prison, but she delivers it slowly, little by little, in minute infinitesimal drops, in thin jets, in small vibrant concretions of energy and substance, of life, of mind. So first was the energy, and then life, of mind, and even these concretions are of life and mind increasingly, as if that were all she could get out through the crass obstacle, the dull, reluctant medium of an inconscient stuff of existence. As if that's all she can do. At first, she houses herself in the forms of matter, which appear to be altogether unconscious, then struggles towards mentality in the guise of living matter, and attains to it imperfectly in the conscious animal. So now he's mapping out the same process going through the levels of consciousness. First, everything is in form of matter, which is altogether unconscious appearing. And this is all you see in rocks. All matter and all elements and all their combinations of molecules, including what we create today through human intervention of the new kinds of plastics that we build. There are still different materials, kinds of matter, but they seem to be all unconscious. But she is housing herself in them. She meaning that universal conscious force, the same Chit Shakti, which is utterly conscious. And so he refers to it as she. Then struggles towards mentality. The stepping out from the form is aiming at mentality, but the first step of mentality is really guise of living matter. The material becomes as if living, so we saw bacteria and other more complex forms. The substance is living somehow, but really it's an expression of mind that is being pushed towards. The life force is only an intermediate effort. If you notice from the very beginning, there is some sense of intelligence. Life cannot exist without some kind of intelligent behavior. So the truth of life really is an attempt to move towards mind, where life form in matter is only a stage in which mind is barely seen. So through living matter, and attains to that mentality imperfectly in the conscious animal. So conscious animal now has intelligence. It has mind. It thinks. It understands. And any of us who have had pets will agree how intelligent they can be. And sometimes as intelligent or more intelligent than human beings, except they couldn't speak. Except they're bound in certain very mechanical, instinctive tendencies. We even see, for example, in dogs, a behavior which is so complex, they even play with irony. They have moods, but intelligence can be such. For example, there's something which I had seen recently in a video. A person was throwing a stick and pulling it back whenever the dog approached it. And the dog deceived the person by going to take something else. When the person turned his attention there, he went and caught the stick and brought it. So that level of complexity where you're anticipating the thought of another human being and playing on that level, it shows a level of intelligence which we did not recognize animals had. In fact, now increasingly the animal experiments show levels of intelligence which seem to be more than human. except they can't speak. I recently saw a dramatic video of a monkey which is shown a computer screen in which numbers appear randomly placed, and he has to punch them in sequence. It's a touch screen. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's obvious when the screen is there, but afterwards they flash the image of the numbers and then hide the numbers, and he has still to punch in sequence. Now this involves memory, it involves also recognizing the sequences, and you see a human being attempting to do that. He goes 1, 2, 3, and then he has lost the 4. The monkey goes all the way to 10, barely looking at the screen, and then they interrupt the monkey. He's shown an image, flashed, closed, and before the monkey can punch, someone distracts him with bananas or whatever, and then it's taken away. He comes back to the screen, he has full recall and goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On a blank screen, he catches all 10 in sequence, repeatedly, where the human being has forgotten even where the 1 was. Now this shows a level of intelligence, sensory intelligence, not abstract intelligence, but sensory intelligence far more developed than the human. Equally emotional intelligence, far more developed than humans. The one thing we have access to, not that we develop it, is the abstract intelligence of self-awareness, the ability to stand back from our own thoughts and consider, I don't like the way I'm thinking. That ability they are unable to reach to. But, or if they reach to it, is still very crude. A few animals are able to reach to it. Some dogs, elephants, dolphins have been shown to have this. And this is shown very easily with what is called the mirror test. You put a spot of paint on their face where they cannot see it, and you place them before a mirror. So the less developed animals will look at the mirror image and think it's someone else. The dog will start barking at the other fellow, trying to fight him. But the conscious dog will look at the image, recognize it is him, recognize the spot which is on his forehead and try to wipe it. And then you know they have the ability for self-awareness. But crude enough. It does not stay for long. And this is in a very few animals. So the emergence of mind, whatever it has managed, imperfectly in the conscious animal. This consciousness is at first rudimentary, mostly a half subconscious or just conscious instinct. That's what you see in most animals. You're driven by instinct. The snake knows exactly where to strike, where to bite. The cheetah knows exactly where to catch the gazelle to paralyze it instantly. You catch the neck and the gazelle stops running. Game over. But how does it know it should catch that? Nobody has really taught it. And you can take them out from their environment at birth and still the instinct is there. And the intelligence is largely an expression of this instinct. Conscious instinct or half subconscious. It develops slowly. Till in more organized forms of living matter, it reaches its climax of intelligence and exceeds itself in man. So you see now the material substance in which the consciousness is housed has to become more complex to allow for this more complex expression of consciousness. But all the time, the picture he is giving is matter is evolving. When consciousness emerges, it is dragging matter into itself and making matter become living, making matter become conscious, and even thinking in matter. And this is the nature of evolution. You could take out the consciousness into its own world without matter. You don't have this evolution. You don't have this struggle of emergence of something which was hidden, which was not there, which was even impossible. The evolution is always of matter and in matter. So the thinking animal, so it reaches its climax of intelligence in the more organized forms of living matter, and then in human being, in man, exceeds itself. The intelligence exceeds. It develops slowly till in more organized forms of living matter, it reaches its climax of intelligence and exceeds itself in man, the thinking animal who develops into the reasoning mental being but carries along with him, even at its highest elevation, the mold of original animality, the dead weight of subconscious of body, the downward pull of gravitation towards the original inertia and nations. So you've come into this extraordinary achievement as a thinking animal, as a reasoning mental being. You have exceeded all the first forms of consciousness which could have emerged. As a reasoning being, mental being, you have this capacity to actually stand back from the consciousness and modify itself. And therefore it exceeds itself. It has the capacity now not only to go beyond what it was, but even all the way. And yet, after you've reached this, what are you dragging with you? Even in the highest elevation of this mold of original animality, you still have that animality hanging. The dead weight of subconscious of body. We are still half animal. Consider most of human life, most of our primary drives, most of our social conventions are the result of our animal past, isn't it? One of the strongest animal instincts is the instinct for procreation. The first thing we do in civilized society is to temper the instinct, block it within boundaries, cover it up neatly so that it does not keep us as animally driven in our passion. So that we can be mental beings. And we bind it carefully. The clothing we wear, for example, is one of the forms in which we cover our animality. And it's not just about hairiness of the skin. We even cover the smell of the body, which is part of our animality, and the subtle communications that take place through smells and pheromones. So you wash yourself so that the smells don't come in the way. You cover the pheromones by perfumes that you use. But what you have done also at the same time, replaced the animal, crude, instinctive communication of body smell by something higher, finer, which reflects the mood of a more awakened consciousness. A beautiful, uplifting perfume, for example, changes the state of consciousness. But think about all the social conventions we have. You'll find eventually they boil down to means by which we limit our animality to allow for a proper, free mental life. The food we eat. If you go to Japan, you have the tea ceremony. Every child has to go through the training. Before you take your cup of tea, you ask the person at the left and the right, would you have some? He says, no thanks. You ask the fellow on the right, would you have some? No thanks. Then you're free to take your cup. But you don't just pick it up like that, grab it. You turn it carefully. Place the handle in a particular direction. Lift it in a particular way. Take a first sip. Place it down. Unlike the dog who looks at it and jumps, chomp, 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 finished. No, we are not that. And as if to assert what we are, all these finer mental nuances of values and relations are imprinted early on. Then you say, oh, this fellow is uncivilized. He's eating like a dog. That fellow is cultured. He lifts his fork and spoon the correct way and eats with his hands, does not place his elbows, whatever the particular forms. All the conventions we have, which we associate with civilizations, are attempts to remove or cover up that animality, which is otherwise so prominent in us. And with it, the dead weight of subconscious of body. The fact that your body actually dulls your mind, dulls your consciousness. How much? If you make the body tired, you cannot think. If in your body you introduce certain chemicals that the body functioning is affected, your mind becomes now affected. You lose coherence of thought. When a person has excessive alcohol in the blood, you find the higher faculties of mind first die. The sense of right and wrong and judgment is killed. In its organization in the physical brain, it is in the frontal lobes that you have the sense of the higher right, wrong, good, bad. That is the first to be dulled. What remains is the second level of the brain, which we call the mammalian brain. And when that dulls, what survives is the third level or the original, what is called the reptilian brain. which controls all your body instincts and survival. So the heart is still beating, the balance is still reasonably kept, you're walking unstably. But all the other faculties on higher levels of brain organization have been dulled top down, interestingly. What it means is if you somehow allow the body to pull down the consciousness, this is the way it goes. It sinks like this. The first things to go are those, and then others, and all the reversal of the evolutionary process takes place. And so it's as if the dead weight of subconscious of the body is still pulling us down constantly, as our awareness is trying to pull itself up constantly. And the downward pull of gravitation towards the original inertia and nations drags down the whole body until it seems to even collapse, age, die. And what happens at death? The substance goes back to what it was, unconscious again. The physicality of it. The control of an inconscient material nature over his conscious evolution, its power for limitation, its laws of difficult developments, its immense force for retardation and frustration. All this lower nature is reaching out, pulling down. We will see this in detail later. The result is, thus hampered and burdened, mental man has still to evolve out of himself the fully conscious being, the divine manhood, or a spiritual and supramental supermanhood, which shall be the next product of the evolution. So the point of this whole series which we have come to is, the work is not done, there is still the further step of the supramental consciousness which has to emerge, the fully revealed divine consciousness out of all this struggle that's pulling you back. That transition will mark the passage from the evolution in the ignorance to a greater evolution in the knowledge, founded and proceeding in the light of the superconscient and no longer in the darkness of the ignorance and inconscience. So it's as if the first phase of evolution has to be driven by this darkness, but once that transition is made, the further evolution will be by the higher power of the light, and it will be a phase 2 of evolution, always in light, always in joy, always in all the powers revealed, but growing in complexity and extent. In this whole journey, the picture, recall, was the divine presence within which is leading this journey. So he has not yet come to that. He is only describing how the power of conscious force, universal conscious force of the Satchidananda, hidden inside matter, behind the veil, behind the screen, is building all this. And through all this, it has brought out its consciousness in a limited way and must now complete this emergence of consciousness all the way to its true, fully revealed consciousness. But now you ask yourself, who's making the journey through these little drops and spurts and organizations? The same presence is organizing itself, building, growing as the conscious soul within. As it has come into its own in the material consciousness, now we go back to what we read in the beginning, it infuses in this materiality itself, makes matter conscious. And when the divine consciousness takes up matter, infusing itself into matter, it makes matter divinely conscious. It can break the stranglehold of this inconscience. Matter need not lapse back into inconscience. It can remain fully awakened. And you will have the final step of evolution, creating matter that is divine substance, which will be the divine body, in which the supramental consciousness will live. So this is just to complete the line of thought. We'll take up the text for greater detailed study next Sunday. And in this chapter, subsequently, he will describe the various strategies that evolution utilizes and the methods used by the conscious force to organize different types of human beings or types of different animals or beings, and how it creates variations of those types, and what is this principle going to be in the further steps of evolution. It's fascinating when you look at the text in depth and stop to question why Sri Aurobindo uses certain words and the suggestions which come with the words. And you recognize how much knowledge is actually captured with a few descriptive suggestions. We can meditate on this for a few minutes.